Hey everybody, this is my 125 gallon native tank, and right now everybody's all banging up against the glass and swimming around because they think they're about to get fed, but they are not. It's actually fairly early on Saturday afternoon. I don't know what my afternoon is going to develop into, so I wanted to shoot a little bit of video before I get out and do anything today because you never know how late it'll be when I get back in. And I actually just watched a video about the Monterey Bay Aquarium Center, and a little bit of information in there I found to be interesting, and it got me thinking about some of my earlier experiences in one of my tanks. So I just want to talk about that a little bit. No real point to this video other than sharing my thoughts and experiences on some of my fish keeping stuff. And in the video, they talked about the microbiome of the water and the way the Monterey Bay Aquarium Center actually pumps fresh ocean water directly in from the ocean and then cycles it through their tanks and pumps it back out, as opposed to most other aquariums that have to use instant ocean, and create their own marine water. And one of the benefits of doing that, of course, is the microbiome that is in the seawater. And if you're not familiar with what a microbiome is, it is the microscopic life that sort of works with other organisms. We actually have a microbiome on our own body. You've got a host of different little microbes and bacterias and different fungus and all kind of stuff that needs to be there. It keeps your skin healthy, it keeps your body functioning properly, and it's all part of your microbiome. And every micro environment, every macro environment, they're everywhere. And fish have a microbiome as well. And so using the salt water right from the ocean, it helps to stabilize the health of these fish and so on and so forth. And I found all that very interesting. And it made me think back to my early days of fish keeping, my very early days of fish keeping, before my gourami tank was even my gourami tank. I started cycling that in with sunfish, believe it or not. That's how I got that tank up and running years ago. And then once the tank was cycled and I kind of got tired of the sunfish, I moved that out and started putting other fish in. And I went on this sort of, there's no such thing as too many water changes kind of mentality. I'd watched a bunch of videos about people keeping discus and how they do, 100% water change every single day. And, if they look at their water funny, they have to go in and do 100% water change because their discus will die if they don't. And so I sort of got this mentality that I needed to just do mad water changes and just keep that water as fresh as I could possibly keep it. And while I didn't do daily 100% water changes, of course, I was doing large, frequent water changes. I would think nothing of doing a 75% water change twice or three times a week. And I used to just struggle with keeping fish alive in that tank. I always had fish that just died. It never really seemed to establish or function. I never got any kind of good I think of it as the patina in your tank. You can look in there and tell the difference between a tank that's brand new versus one that's got a nice, healthy, established growth to it. I personally don't like those tanks that the people get in and they scrub every rock and they scrub every ornament and they scrub the glass and every water change makes the tank look like they just set it up yesterday. Other people like that look, and that's fine. If that's their tank, they can do that. I don't like that look, and I could never get my tank to stop looking like that, or I'd have wild algae outbreaks, or I'd have cloudy water. And every time I would have an issue, I would get in there and I would say, I would think maybe I'm not doing enough water changes, and I would get in there and I would do more water changes and more water changes. And I just never, ever had luck getting my tanks to settle down and just stabilize. And so eventually, again, this is when I was very new. I didn't even test pH. I knew nothing about water hardness or anything like that. So that began my journey of learning about all that kind of stuff. And I began to realize that maybe there is such a thing as too many water changes. And maybe I do need to just chill out a little bit and let the tank settle in. And I did, and the less I did to the tank, the more successful it was, and eventually I just sort of got into the routine of not doing a lot at all. So when you look at tanks like my 29 miscellaneous, I've had people ask me before, you always mention that tank is kind of neglected and you don't do many water changes on it. If you're aware of this, why don't you just do more water changes and step up the pace a little bit? And, it's habit. That's the way I established that tank. And that tank that's probably got bright red nitrate tests, it's probably got 60 or 80 parts per million nitrates in that tank. I do a water change on it every 6 weeks or something. That has been my most stable and success. I don't even have to think about that tank. It just ticks over like a clock. And so that seems to be my experience with most of my tanks. The tanks that I just don't do a lot to always seem to be the healthiest and the most stable. Now, I'm not advocating in any way neglecting doing water changes and keeping your nitrates within a reasonable level. If you're familiar with my videos, I'm not a stickler for keeping the nitrates, under 40 parts per million or anything like that. I don't think you need to be stressed out about that. But they do need to stay reasonable. If you start letting your nitrates get ridiculously high, over 100 parts per million, and up into the triple digits or whatever, and then you're talking about, that's just neglect at that point. You really should get and do water changes a little more frequently than that. But it takes a while to get the nitrates up that high. I've mentioned before about nitrate shock. I'm not really going to talk about that again. I don't honestly really even think that nitrate shock is an actual thing, and I'm basing that on my experience plus all the research I've done. But one of these days I will talk about that too. I know that's one of those videos I've promised and I've never gotten around to doing. But I just don't think that's, the case. I think when you do big water changes like that and the fish suddenly suffer, it's probably got more to do with the water hardness changing too rapidly. The total dissolved solids overall, not just nitrates, but everything else in the tank being shifted from a very high volume to a very low volume, that could have an impact. So, again, doing the massive water changes was just not working for me. And so it took me a long time to sort of settle into a routine, and I treat all of my tanks differently. Most of my tanks get water changes at different intervals, and I don't do it necessarily based on a time frame or anything like that. I just do it based on it's been long enough that I feel that it needs a water change. And generally when I test for my nitrates or test for the total dissolved solids or other types of tests I can do to see, what's building up in the tank, so to speak, I'm usually pretty spot on when I decide it's time for a water change. Sometimes I'm a little, maybe I should have done it a week or two ago. But for the most part, I'm able to keep my tanks up and running fairly healthy. I do have the occasional algae issue like I'm having here in this tank at the moment, although that's coming under control nicely now that I've got some live bears in there. And very shortly we are going to have 4 Siamese algae eaters in here, true Siamese algae eaters. So that hair algae is about to be gone. And then once again, this is another one of those tanks that I just leave alone. I don't do much to. And the only reason I started having issues with it is because I started messing around with it. I started changing the lighting, I started changing the stocking density and when I fed it, and then boom, all of a sudden things shifted and I started having issues. So leaving well enough alone is a difficult lesson for the new fish keeper to learn, but I think it's an important one. There really is such a thing as doing too many water changes and doing too much tank maintenance and scrubbing it out too clean. Leave well enough alone in a lot of cases and you're going to be much better off. Your tanks are going to stabilize and settle in, and in the long run you're going to be a lot less stressed out. It's a lot less work for you. It just makes the hobby more enjoyable all the way around. Come over here and we'll have a look. Finalize the video here on my Gourami tank. I know I got a lot of glare going on. I wasn't really expecting to look at this tank at the moment. But this is the tank that sort of started it all as far as like my big tanks in the basement. My 29 here was my first tank that I didn't do really a whole lot of anything to. And that red you see is a reflection. That's not actually in the tank. This is the tank that I didn't do a lot to and I still don't do a lot to. And it ticks over like a clock. You can see that blue. That's a genetically modified skirt tetra, so you would think just the genetically modified aspect of it would mean it would have a shortened lifespan. It's a skirt tetra, and I've had it since my very early days of fish keeping, and that skirt tetra is probably pushing 6 years old now. So, you can say what you want about how often I do water changes in this tank, but I don't have any problems with it ever. So, of course, now that I said that, it's probably going to explode tomorrow, so cross your fingers on that one. But from that tank, I moved on to this one, and this is the one I said, oh, this one I'm going to take serious, and I'm going to do, you know, water change after water change after water change. And then this is the tank that I just started having issue after issue after issue. You know, but that was 6 years ago, 7 years ago. I don't even know how long it's been at this point. But eventually I learned my lesson, and I learned that just chilling out, letting things be sometimes is the way to go. Now, having said that, that's not always the way to go. Sometimes you do need to get in there and address issues, but sometimes just chilling out and letting things be is the way to let it go. So there you go. Just a few thoughts off the top of my head. No real point to the video. As I said, just saw another video, got me thinking about some stuff, and I began reminiscing about my early days of fish keeping. I thought I'd share that with everybody. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. This tank here is what I call my waterfall tank. Make sure you're subscribed, and that way you won't miss anything I got coming up. You never know what it's going to be with me. So thanks again. I'll see you real soon in the next one.